Across the recorded history of the UFO phenomenon, witnesses have repeatedly described encounters with beings who appear remarkably human. Tall figures, often fair-haired, calm in demeanour, and sometimes described as wearing simple uniforms or close-fitting garments. During the 1950s, such figures became widely known in UFO literature as Space Brothers. In later decades, researchers and commentators would increasingly refer to them by another label, Nordic aliens. Yet, while witnesses sometimes appeared to describe similar figures, the investigators who studied these reports reached very different conclusions about what they might represent. Some interpreted them as visitors from other worlds. Some regarded the experiences as psychological or perceptual events. Others proposed that the phenomenon might have little or nothing to do with an extraterrestrial life at all. Tonight we examine the researchers themselves, 7 investigators, 7 interpretations, and 1 question that remains unresolved. What exactly were the so-called Space Brothers? One of the earliest and most influential descriptions of human-appearing extraterrestrials emerged from the Contactee movement of the early 1950s. In 1952, an amateur astronomer named George Adamski claimed that he had encountered a visitor from another planet in the California desert. The being, whom Adamski later identified as a man called Orthon, was described as human in appearance, tall, fair-skinned, with long, light-coloured hair. Adamski stated that the visitor had arrived in a landed craft and communicated with him partly through gestures and partly through telepathic impressions. In Adamski's account, the visitor came from Venus and belonged to a group of extraterrestrial observers concerned about humanity's use of nuclear weapons. Over the following years, similar claims emerged from other contactees in Europe and North America. Many described encounters with human-looking visitors who appeared physically indistinguishable from people of Northern European ancestry. These figures were often portrayed as calm and benevolent and technologically advanced. Within the UFO literature of the 1950s and 1960s, they became known as the Space Brothers. Whether these accounts represented genuine encounters, imaginative narratives, or misinterpreted experiences remains, of course, uncertain. But the image of the tall, fair-haired humanoid extraterrestrial became one of the most enduring archetypes in UFO lore, and it's this figure that many researchers would later attempt to explain. Brinsley was a British writer, politician and aristocrat who later became the 8th Earl of Clancarty, and beginning in the late 1950s, he produced a series of books exploring the possibility of extraterrestrial involvement in both ancient history and the modern UFO phenomenon. Among them were The Sky People from 1960, The Flying Saucer Story from 1966, and Forgotten Heritage from 1973. He proposed that many ancient myths and religious traditions might represent misunderstood encounters with technologically advanced non-human visitors. In his interpretation, figures described in religious texts, such as angels or heavenly messengers, could in some cases reflect encounters with extraterrestrial intelligences. He also speculated that early human civilization might have been influenced or even assisted by advanced visitors from other worlds. These ideas placed him within a broader body of speculation that later became widely known as the ancient astronaut hypothesis. His critics argue that his conclusions relied heavily on speculative reinterpretations of historical sources rather than actual empirical evidence. Supporters viewed his work as an attempt to reconsider ancient traditions through a technological framework. Whether such extraterrestrial visitors ever existed remains an open question. Timothy Good emerged during the late 20th century as one of the most widely known British authors writing on UFOs and alleged government knowledge of extraterrestrial contact. His books include Above Top Secret from 1987, Alien Liaison from 1991, and Need to Know from 2007. He compiled testimony from military personnel, intelligence sources, and civilian witnesses who claimed knowledge of unidentified aerial phenomena. Within these accounts, he described reports of several alleged extraterrestrial species. Among them were human-appearing beings, often described in terms consistent with the Nordic stereotype. He also discussed claims that government officials may have had direct encounters with the extraterrestrial visitors. One widely circulated story concerns an alleged meeting between United States President Dwight D. Eisenhower and extraterrestrial representatives in 1954. Accounts of this alleged meeting vary in detail and origin, and the claim does predate Good's publications. However, Good helped to bring the story to wider public attention by citing witnesses who asserted that such an encounter had occurred. According to some versions of that story, the visitors were described as human-looking and fair-haired. If you enjoy the Erie's Vault videos, please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel to help more people discover these videos about ghosts, cryptids, aliens, strange phenomena, and weird things in the UK. Your support costs nothing but a few seconds of your time. Please subscribe and like the video. And while some writers pursued broad theoretical explanations, other investigators concentrated on documenting and cataloguing reports. Two important figures associated with this approach were Charles Bowen and Gordon Creighton. Charles Bowen served for many years as editor of the British journal Flying Saucer Review, one of the most influential UFO periodicals of the post-war period. In 1969, he edited a major anthology titled The Humanoids. The volume assembled reports and analyses from researchers around the world concerning sightings of humanoid figures associated with UFO landings. Contributors included Jacques Vallée, Gordon Creighton, Coral Lorenzen, Antonio Ribera, and Amy Michel. The intention of the book was not to promote the claims of the Contactee movement. Instead, Bowen and his collaborators sought to assemble documented cases in which witnesses reported observing humanoid occupants in association with unidentified craft. In the introduction, the editors emphasized their interest in observational reports rather than philosophical or spiritual messages that were often attributed to extraterrestrials by contact claimants. Within the cases compiled in The Humanoids, witnesses described a wide range of entities. Some appeared small or mechanical. Others were described as tall, human-like figures. However, the editors deliberately avoided proposing a definitive explanation for these reports. The existence of Nordic aliens as a distinct extraterrestrial race was not asserted. Instead, the book presented the cases as a body of unexplained observations requiring further study. Gordon Creighton, a British diplomat and accomplished linguist, was also closely associated with Flying Saucer Review. He contributed research and translations of UFO reports originating in several countries, helping to introduce English-speaking audiences to cases that had previously appeared only in foreign language publications. Among the cases discussed in the broader UFO literature of the period was the Antonio Villas Boas incident, reported in Brazil in 1957. In that case, the witness described being taken aboard an unidentified craft and encountering humanoid occupants. One female figure was described as fair-skinned with reddish hair. Although this description differs from the later stereotypes of the blonde Nordic visitor, the case became one of the earliest widely discussed abduction reports involving humanoid beings. Creighton's role was primarily to present and circulate these accounts for examination. Although his views evolved over time, he did generally treat individual reports as documents to be preserved and studied, rather than as proof of a single definitive explanation. and by the late 20th century, UFO research increasingly evolved systematic analysis of witness reports. One of the most prominent British investigators associated with this approach was Jenny Randles. Randles served for many years as Director of Investigations for the British UFO Research Association, commonly known as BUFORA. Her publications include The UFO Reality, Abduction, and Alien Contact, and through the examination of large numbers of encounter reports, Randles noted that certain types of entities appeared more frequently in particular time periods and cultural contexts. In analyses of European cases, especially those reported after the mid-1950s, she observed recurring descriptions of human-appearing beings often characterized as tall, fair-haired, and calm in demeanor. These descriptions closely resemble what later writers would call Nordic aliens. Randles also observed that different types of entities appeared to dominate UFO narratives in different regions and eras. Later North American reports, for example, frequently described small grey-skinned beings rather than human-looking figures. Randles suggested that cultural expectations and psychological factors might influence how witnesses interpret unusual experiences. I'm interested as to your thoughts on these cases. On Erie's Vault, we have a vibrant and engaged community with whom you can discuss not only these cases, but the philosophy behind them, the merits and demerits of each. And of course, you can tell us your own experiences in the comments section and on our Erie's Vault Live viewer call-in show. Albert Budden developed a hypothesis linking certain UFO experiences to environmental electromagnetic fields. In his book UFOs, Psychic Close Encounters, Budden argued that electromagnetic fields generated by power lines, geological formations, or atmospheric conditions might influence the human nervous system. Such influences, he suggested, could in some circumstances produce vivid perceptual experiences involving lights and sound, or even the apparent presence of entities. Budden investigated several locations where UFO sightings or close encounter reports had been concentrated, and he proposed that environmental electromagnetic factors might have contributed to altered states of perception. Within this framework, then, encounters with humanoid figures, including these Nordic-type beings, could represent perceptual experiences produced by unusual conditions interacting with human physiology. Ivan T. Sanderson approached unexplained phenomena from yet another perspective. Originally trained as a zoologist and naturalist, Sanderson became interested in a wide range of anomalous reports, including cryptids, unexplained aerial phenomena, and unusual oceanic sightings. And in his book, Invisible Residents of 1970, Sanderson proposed that some unidentified flying objects might represent craft or technologies belonging to unknown intelligences native to Earth, rather than visitors from other planets. He suggested the possibility of advanced non-human intelligences inhabiting remote or largely unexplored regions of our planet, including deep ocean environments. Sanderson referred to such hypothetical beings as OINTs, other intelligences. He was a fan of these little acronyms, and within this framework, some reported encounters with humanoid figures associated with UFOs might involve unknown terrestrial intelligences, rather than extraterrestrial visitors. He was also openly skeptical of many contactee claims describing benevolent extraterrestrials delivering these philosophical messages to humanity. By the late 20th century, the Nordic alien concept had become one of the most recognizable motifs within UFO lore. Yet the investigators who studied the reports couldn't agree on what they represented. For Poer Trench, such beings fit into a much broader narrative of extraterrestrial involvement in human history. For Timothy Good, they appeared within testimony suggesting that governments may already have encountered advanced extraterrestrial visitors. For Charles Bowen and Gordon Creighton, they were simply one category among many reported humanoid occupants, associated with UFO sightings. For Jenny Randles, they represented a recurring cultural motif, appearing in witness descriptions during a particular historical period. For Albert Budden, such figures might arise from perceptual experiences influenced by environmental electromagnetic conditions, and for Ivan T. Sanderson, they might not be extraterrestrial at all, but manifestations of unknown intelligences native to Earth. 7 researchers, many interpretations, and no universally accepted explanation. Across decades of investigation, witnesses have continued to report encounters with human-appearing beings associated with unidentified craft. They describe them as tall, with fair hair. They describe them as calm observers. The meaning of these encounters, however, remains uncertain. The researchers who studied them disagreed not only about the explanation, but about the nature of the phenomenon itself. Witnesses describe similar figures, but conclusions remain divided. The Space Brothers debate continues, and the identity of the beings described in these encounters remains unknown.